welcome to the Global Grid Experience. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Erica, your host. I actually got asked to do an episode on this topic today. Are our voices getting heard in Congress? We're asked to make calls, write letters, sign petitions, protest, but does it actually go anywhere? Let's find out. I invited Ben Anderson to give us a little insight. I met Ben through my work with Citizens Climate Lobby. Our local chapter met with him regularly in person, over breakfast, some of us who live further away by Zoom, to talk about issues, hear where our representative stood on topics, and to share our concerns to be passed up the chain to our representative. Ben has worked for 3 members of Congress from Minnesota, the U.S. House Committee on Agriculture, and at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Let's hear what he has to say. Hi, Ben. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. Thanks so much for joining the Global Grid Experience. I'm happy you're here.
Glad to be here. Congrats on the podcast.
Thank you. So I actually was requested for this podcast to talk about, we've always been told, call your members of Congress, get your voices heard. And this person asked, does it really matter? I thought, who better than you to talk about this, having worked as a congressional staffer in the DC and district, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. Well, thanks for thinking of me. And it's cool that people are wondering about these sort of things and looking to be impactful.
Yeah. So first of all, do you want to tell me just briefly the different positions you've had as a congressional staff person?
Yeah. So at the beginning of my career, basically when I was out of college, I went to DC and I was a legislative staffer out there in the U.S. Senate for Norm Coleman, and also at the House Agriculture Committee for Congressman Gil Gutnick. And so I worked both in the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House in DC. And then I was in the Bush administration at USDA the last 2 years of President Bush's administration, where I worked on rural development policies and programs, running one of the agencies for that out there. And then back here in Minnesota, I did some non-political community work at a Chamber of Commerce and with University of Minnesota Extension. And then I also worked for Congresswoman Michelle Fischbach as her district director here in Western Minnesota.
First of all, tell us a little bit about the different roles that a congressional staffer has versus a DC staffer and a district one.
Yeah, in the district, you're basically on the ground meeting with a lot of constituents and organizations where you're just learning from constituents and organizations and businesses, local and state leaders about federal policies that they're concerned with or have a stake in or want to weigh in on. So as you would expect, a member of Congress gets countless requests for meetings and invites to events and so on. So that's what the staff predominantly helps with is covering all those requests, because it's just too much for any one person. And then that information that a district staffer would gather, that would get eventually in some fashion get routed up the chain within the office back to the member for their awareness or for their action, depending on what it might be. And then on the DC side, the staff out there kind of do the same thing, but it's a little more legislative focused. So a lot of the staffers in a DC office, congressional office, are legislative staffers, and they kind of do the same thing like I talked about, just meeting with a lot of people, but it's more kind of narrowly focused on some sort of legislative or regulatory fix or change. So the outcome of those meetings might be that a piece of legislation gets drafted, or the member signs on to a piece of legislation as a co-sponsor, or they do some sort of weighing in with a federal department on a regulation that the person talked with them about, those sort of things.
All right.
So on the district side, it's a little more about outreach and just kind of being present and there. And then on the DC side, it's a little more focused on legislative or policy action.
Okay, thanks for that summary. So, are we getting heard? What's the process of our voices and actions reaching our representatives and our senators? When I call in on 5 calls or just directly with a concern that I have, where does that go?
Yeah, definitely constituents are heard and that feedback or weighing in is taken into account in a member's office. These days, every office would have some sort of, database program that would collect all this information and track it and everything like that. So it's really easy for a member to see like how many people are, contacting on a certain issue, whether it's pro or con, and regardless of the method of contact. So in the end, it doesn't necessarily matter like the format that a person contacts, whether it's phone call, letter, or email. It kind of just all gets, into the same system and into the same very just general pool of responses. Again, whatever their issue is that they're coming in contacting about. And, maybe you break it down in a general sense as to like they're for it or against it or some other factor with it. So when it's kind of like a big issue, I would say from what I've seen in offices, like they typically might take into account like how many people were for something or against something. If it's more of just like a really unique issue, like say only one person contacts about it or a few people contact about like a really narrowly focused issue, then that's something that the office or the member might specifically follow up on. Say if there was like a farm program that there was some regulation or interpretation of it that was harmful to farmers in the district or a state, the office or the member would pass that information on to USDA and try to get it fixed for the benefit of the constituents who are contacting about it. Usually when a lot of people contact an office about something, it's on a piece of legislation that might be, moving through the committee or coming up for a vote on the floor. And in that case, the member would probably just take into account, like I said earlier, like how many people are for it, how many people are against it, those sort of things. And then other factors go into those sort of decisions as well, of course. But in the most general sense, that's how constituent contact is considered. So it is valuable. It's important for people to share their takes on things and their opinions on things with their elected officials.
So, some of the tactics when you call, some people say, well, I tell them all the reasons why, and they have a dialogue with the person answering the phone. And some other
Mm-hmm.
tactics are, I'm just going to call and say, I'm for this, I'm against this, I'm this, I'm this, I'm that, I'm that, and just rattle them off to have the tally mark. Which one is more effective?
Um, that can really depend on if it's a phone call, like who's taking the call. You might get an intern on the call who's answering the phone, and in their position, their experience and everything and responsibilities, they're just going to take the call down and probably not have a lot of back and forth. If you happen to get one of the legislative staffers on the phone, they're likely to be more engaging and back and forth conversation about it. So if you were just calling an office in general, I would just, just like the general phone number, like you don't know any of the staffers or anything, you don't have that sort of relationship built, then I would just make your points and that they would get taken down and considered in some way. But the better thing to do would be, like with the organization CCL as an example, and every, organization, sort of trade association and whatnot takes this approach, but it's better to develop a relationship with the office, get to know all the staffers who were involved with helping the member make decisions on the policy issues that you care about, and then talk to those staffers and make an effort to get a meeting with the member herself or himself to have more of a specific engaging conversation about it. That's how you're more likely to influence something and get something in front of them on the top of their mind and so on.
And just for audience here, CCL is Citizens Climate Lobby, and 5 calls is the app where you can call directly to your congressperson. So When you do meet with somebody that you do know, like I've lobbied with Citizens Climate Lobby in DC, how does that then reach our congressperson?
In the offices I worked at, and I think this is, probably typical for most, if not all offices, but if you're a staffer and you're meeting with an organization, the staffer would summarize the issue, and ultimately that would go to others in the office. So say like when I met with you through CCL and heard about the policy issues that you cared about and so on, I would take that information. I'd share it with the respective legislative assistant in DC. Maybe that would also go to the legislative director or the chief of staff, depending on what the policy point is or who the organization is and everything. And then ultimately that would get to the member either through a meeting or a conversation, or I think a lot of offices put like summary reports together from the staff of who they met with and what the organization or the person was concerned about. So ultimately that gets to the member in that sense. And then it'd be considered either just as a thing that's kind of for their awareness, if it's just information, if it's a piece of legislation that's not necessarily moving right now, but if it was legislation or something like really timely that was moving or needed to kind of be decided right away or was in play at the moment for some reason, then that would kind of be presented to the member in a different sense. And then some sort of action would happen on that.
What about emails and petitions that we get asked to sign and then they say, personalize it, that will get further? Are those worth signing the petition and trying to craft your own little personal message? Or how does that work?
Yeah, those sort of petitions in general are, worth doing for organizations and people. Like I said, ultimately those would get tallied up into different categories for the members' awareness. It is always good, whether you're just contacting a member or an office on your own or through a formal petition that's being crafted by another organization. It's always good to customize it and add your personal take or your personal impact of it, because that's more authentic, it's more real, it's more relatable. It shows the office or the member like how their constituent is actually getting impacted in a real way. So yeah, if you're able to add those sort of things, that's always much better.
Like, is somebody going and reading all those?
If it's part of a pool of like 20,000 things, maybe yes, maybe not. I mean, it just really depends. Probably the offices, like I said, the systems that they use to track all the constituent contact, it might automatically put them into like a pool of correspondence or contacts about those things. So again, like I said earlier, there's more value in getting to know like people in the office, whether it's a staffer or the member, it's himself or herself. That will help out in those sort of situations, and in general is a best practice. Because yeah, part of it is just what's realistic and practical for an office. If they're going to get, like thousands of contacts on one sort of issue, and especially if they're kind of coming through just a form that is on some website, then it might get just pooled into a grouping of those sort of messages. And it just depends on if, all the specifics are read or caught. It's almost impossible to do that if you're getting that level of contact on an issue.
Do you have anything to say about organizational support? So I'm Erica, I'm doing my own little thing out there, or I'm Erica and I'm a part of Citizens Climate Lobby, or I'm a part of Protect the Boundary Waters, or I'm a part of Earth Justice. Is there
Mm-hmm.
is there a difference in impact with solo or organizational, or maybe it's a little combo of both?
I think both are important in different ways. Again, if you're sharing your specific constituent views on something that has value, in other cases, an organization, might carry more like authority or weight on an issue. So that's good too. So they both really are. I think it's important to just, if you're kind of in a situation where you're you have a personal take on something, but you're also involved with an organization who also has that position that you care about. I think it's important just to say both, that I'm a constituent and I'm part of this organization, and here's this issue that we're weighing in on and have whatever the opinion is. I would do it that way.
That sounds good. That's what I'm doing. And it feels good to have my own voice, but it also feels good to have the support and organizational backing that I can add my voice to and support to.
Yeah, and for a lot of people, this might be new to them, contacting a congressional office and weighing in on a policy issue, putting themselves out there in that sense. So if that's the case for somebody, I think that's one of the values of the organization that you're involved with that's helping you with this. They can kind of provide the messaging or the support or the encouragement to do those sort of things. So that's why I think for a lot of people, that's why they do things like that through an organization and in alignment with the messages that they put together.
And how about community events and town halls? Does that help to pack the room when you've got people arguing different things? And how do you get your message out at those meetings to be heard?
Yeah, it can help to attend those sort of things. I always told people, do everything you can, in the sense of it means make a phone call or send an email or a letter, try to get a meeting with a staffer or the member themselves, try to attend an event that they're going to be at or a meeting that they're hosting. If you're interested in like the more party politics side of things and that works out for you, to be involved that way and connect with the member that way as well, that helps. Basically, as many ways as you can have contact with an office in productive ways is the way to go about it. So those are all like the typical options that are there. So the more you're able to do that and the more there's like a relationship with the office, the more impactful you're going to be in the end.
What about rallies and protests? People ask that. Does that ever make it up the chain?
Yeah, members are definitely aware of that. Those are happening. I think those sort of events and efforts, it just adds to their consideration or their awareness of, what the mood of people is on a certain issue and how they're mobilizing about it and the ways in which they're doing it. So yeah, it's more of like again, it can depend on the issue and who the people are and what they're saying and everything. But in the most general sense, I think those sort of efforts help amplify the issue and add another kind of component or layer to it. And then depending on what it is in some way, that kind of helps shape the members' like awareness or position on things.
Oh, this has been so interesting. It's so good to get a kind of I don't know what to call it, behind the scenes view into how this all works so I can have information to share with others too. Is there anything else you'd like to share that can be helpful for us out there trying to move the needle a little bit?
I would just reiterate again, like the main point is to approach this in as many different ways as you can as a person who cares about things. Do all the general sort of outreach and communication, but also try to get in with the office in some way, whether it's by yourself or through an organization. And in that setting, you'll have more time and you'll have more attention from them, and that could be helpful to you in the end.
Oh, this has been great. Thanks so much, Ben, for joining the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
That was Ben Anderson from Central Minnesota. Thanks, Ben. And as always, thank you all for listening and being a part of the Global Grid experience. I don't know why I always sing. I so appreciate you. If you're new to speaking up, I invite you to consider, my psychologist says that, I invite you to consider Erica, though she doesn't really sound like that, but I don't know. Invite me not to consider pulling my hair out, I want to say, but okay, for reals. I invite you to consider putting 5 calls on your phone and making a call to your Congress peeps once a week with 1 to 3 topics you're concerned about. You'll feel good. or write an email, whatever works for you. I was at a recent protest, and it felt good to be with fellow noisemakers, peacemakers, neighbors, all around good people. Hang in there, my friends. We can do this. It's worth it. Talk soon.